Hi everyone, my name is Viknesh Kobinathan. I'm a programmer with the Asian Film Archive, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's talk from this very rainy Singapore evening. Today's program is the first of a month of film screenings and talks called Reframe Inland Island. And today we're very pleased to have with us our guest curator, Patrick Campos, who'll be doing an introductory talk. So just a bit about Reframe and also about the Inland Island program. So Reframe is a yearly program that we do about twice a year, where we invite guest curators from around the world to present something with their own research and topics that they are interested in. So Reframe Inland Island is the first program of 2022 that we're presenting under this banner. The screening program starts tomorrow. There will be screening exclusively at the Oldham Theatre here in Singapore, but there will also be an online program that has launched on AFA's website today, which has about a few short films that anyone can watch for free from around the world. Today's talk is part of that program, and there'll be another talk happening on the 31st of March. More details for that will come soon. So I just want to say a few words about Patrick, who's going to be joining us now. Patrick is a film scholar, programmer, and associate professor at the University of Philippines Film Institute and a member of NETPAC. His research investigates the intertwining of political and cinematic discourses and problematizes notions of national and regional cinema formations. So Patrick's deep involvement and research in these topics are what really prompted us to approach him. And once we approached him with this topic and he presented us this amazing proposal, we were immediately won over. And we're very happy to be working with him, and he has given us this really brilliant program that's going to start unfolding in the next couple of weeks. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Patrick over. Hi, Patrick. Hi, Patrick.
Hello everyone. Thank you for the kind words, Viknesh.
Thank you for joining us from the Philippines. How are you today?
Well, I'm great. I wish I could be there, but well.
Yeah, we wish you could be here too, but under different circumstances, right? Yeah.
That's right.
But yeah, so I'm just gonna leave you to it and do your talk. And then just to remind our viewers out there, there's gonna be a short Q&A session right after Patrick finishes his talk. You can already start to submit your questions wherever you're watching it, either on Facebook or YouTube. Just type it in the comment section, and we'll be able to see it right away. You can type this anytime during the talk, and we will get to your questions as soon as Patrick concludes his talk. So I'm just gonna leave now and leave Patrick to it. So yeah, take it away, Patrick.
Thank you, Viknesh. It's great to be with you virtually tonight, although I can't see you. I'd like to thank the Asian Film Archive for inviting me to curate this month's Reframe program and serving as interlocutors in the process. It was a very gratifying process. My thanks to, of course, to Karen and the programming team, Viknesh and Natalie and Jolie. I was telling them that sad though I am that I couldn't make it in Oldham Theatre. I'm very, very thankful for this opportunity to curate the program. It's been the most comprehensive exhibition that fleshes out my research and thinking on the subject. So I'm happy and grateful. I suppose some of you have already seen the list of films and have read the short curatorial note that I prepared. So allow me to just enlarge the discussion by highlighting a few points. And also allow me to share my screen so I could help you visualize what I'm talking about. Right. I hope you can see it. Often we frame films from Southeast Asia heuristically, commercially, geographically, as works emanating from national cinemas. When they are invited to international film festivals, we celebrate them as films, say, from the Philippines rather than from Visayas or Mindanao. This automatic association is not surprising, although it is neither natural nor the only way to think about films. The field is distorted with a view from the outside looking in, and the farther we are outside, the more obscure things get. Cartographically, everything is distorted to favor a particular category when we map. And in the scale of nation states, particular places can be but dots or altogether hidden. We tend to situate individual works within the topography of vast but unitary spaces. For example, if we are not from Thailand, we might treat the agricultural setting in a film like Urupong Raksasad's Stories from the North as an undifferentiated space from Thailand rather than specific places in Chiang Rai. Even in this case, we perform figurative associations and mental comparisons. We might think how different is the setting from Bangkok, but also perhaps how similar it is from agricultural and rural areas we are familiar with in the region. This at bottom is how the films in the program create lines of comparison. So I'd like to begin the conversation by asking a series of questions. So I hope you could follow me when it gets a little bit naughty. How do Muslims from Mindanao in southern Philippines, the subjects of Gutierrez Mangansakan's documentary Forbidden Memory, interrogate the Christian majority and Manila up north, the seat of power of dictator Marcos, that launched a counterinsurgency that resulted in the massacre and abuse of thousands of civilians? As well, we could ask, what is the meaning of the movement southward toward militarized zones and places with secessionist movements when we compare Forbidden Memory with Pimpakatuwira's The Island Funeral? What could an island such as the one fantasized in The Island Funeral that's never been mapped, a place of refuge and solace for Muslim Thais, not because it embraces Islam, but because it recognizes no religions or ethnicities in a country with a Buddhist majority, mean for Mindanaoans in the Philippines, Muslim or otherwise, just as for the people of Patani in Thailand? How is the process of conjuring an island removed from the center and built from hope and dreams comparable to conjuring Minquay Trong's The City of Mirrors, likewise removed from the center but built instead from longing and memory? Surely, hopeful dreams share much in common with nostalgic remembrance, the good things about them just as much as the sad things about them. Could Mindanaoans from the Philippine Islands, such as those pictured in Sharon Dayok's Ways of the Sea, have been imagining Sabah in Malaysia as their fantasy island or city of mirrors? And what if Sabah is not the escape hoped for, but as Indonesians and Filipinos who have become fugitives and stateless in Malaysia find out, only the house without the ground, as Putri Purnama Suga pictures it? Or what if people had never had singular identities to begin with, because cultures are not discrete and stable, but always at the very least hybrid identities, such as the family in Kiat Aung Chong's The Story of Southern Island, living fields, living in fields in Kedah, Malaysia, on the border of southern Thailand, but a place not unlike those in Stories from the North? Or in the islands of Langkawi, Kedah's floating district, a place not unlike the Island Funeral, which we could imagine in fact as being one, where the Orang Laut, the Sama Badjaos, ancient seafarers of the region, not bound by state lines, sailed and roamed as recalled by Brian Chu's documentary, A Life Forgotten. What of peoples who have not tried to escape but were forced to leave, such as the titular character in Remton Zuasola's Eleutheria's Dream, or forced into conflict by geography and history, such as those that populate Kasyong and Cyril Eberle's Melody of Change, and Pham Tu Hang's The Soil, The Future Cries Beneath Our Soil? Or those whose home places are being or were already erased physically or from memory, such as those in Kalyani Mam's Lost World, or those who have found themselves not having double identities but lacking even one, as the subjects in House Without the Ground, Sileng Lernkamp's Flying Dream, Kirsten Tan's Daddy, and Russell Morton's Saudade. As the preceding question suggests, and as the program emblematizes, the more films are produced in and about subnational places beyond historical centers of filmmaking in the celluloid century, such as Manila, Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, Bangkok, and Saigon, the better we understand life on the ground, the conflicts of border living and being caught at crossfires, the struggle of minorities, natives, and the marginalized, the flows of migration, and specific formal and aesthetic preoccupations that the scale and the discourse of the national obscure. The more particular the places are, the more a supranational outlook, potentially collaborative and cooperative, or at the very least in conversation, becomes imaginable. This is not like the Imagine John Lennon utopia kind of thing, no? But there is undoubtedly a utopian element in these grassroots, ground-up visions in the way the unveiling of the hidden harbors promises of utopia. This is topological instead of topographic thinking. In topography, we dwell on visible, long-held, pragmatic, unquestioned official features of surfaces, natural and artificial boundaries. Here, mountains and seas, just as much as walls and fences, can be perceived as dividing lines. Topologically, we begin with the assumption that divisions are arbitrary or accidental, and connections and groupings of all sorts, including counterintuitive ones, are possible if not preferred. Thus, in selecting the films for the program, the spaces of center were preferred. This selection process is embodied in various ways by the artists, the films, their contexts, or their capacity or intention to interrogate the politics of the national. From one end of the program, Letter to an Angel is an excellent example of these parameters and configurations. Garin Nugroho had long been a pioneering figure in Indonesian indie cinema, straddling his work between Jakarta and the alternative center of Jogja. At the same time, the film is the first to be set in Pulau Sumba, although it is not only in this fact that makes it relevant to the project, but more importantly that Garin had worked with locals to realize the film. And this is in 1994. In some selections, the artists may not be based off center, but they foreground displacement, erasures, or naturalized divisions by stepping out of their own circles. This is epitomized from multiple directions in space and history in the online program decentered on the island city-state of Singapore and its outsides, margins, and others. On the other end of the program is Yuda Kurniawan's The Ballads of Cinema Lovers that happens in Purbalingga, chronicling the formation and growth of a grassroots filmmaking community and as such becomes an object of censorship. In this light, films that address sociocultural specificities through cinematic placemaking may be productively considered non-national for refusing the homogenizing tendency of nationalism, especially as imposed by the state or from the center. At the same time, placemaking films, being community-based, tend to be marginal by default, paradoxically rendering them critical of or in dialogue with nationalism and thus truly national in their capacity to give space and voice to subjugated, obscured, disenfranchised, forgotten, or silent subjects. The enabling concepts of inland and island allow us to imagine alternatives to national cinema and fruitfully conceptualize regional cinema. Key to the dynamism of archipelagic life in Southeast Asia, the program offers an alternative paradigm that traces lines of comparability and connection among peoples while setting in relief the irreducible difference and singularity of places. Archipelagic imagination heralds the openness and fluidity of figurative and literal island networks expanding beyond nation states. Instead of picturing islands as isolated and inlands as movements away from other islands, the program turns to their generative relationality, demonstrating how films and filmmaking and film communities are situated, multiple, non-hierarchical. Thus, we don't only proceed with the assumption that there is no fixed center, whether the capital city, the renowned auteur, or the internationally acclaimed film, but that the growth of filmmaking in so-called peripheries co-constitute each other. For example, the formation of film communities in Purbalingga, Cirebon, Papua, Aceh, Kupang, Bali in Indonesia, and in Pampanga, Bicol, Iloilo, Dumaguete, Zamboanga, Nabunturan in the Philippines are not merely coincidental, but discursively co-constitutive. The growth of inland and island cinemas is revelatory for being highly localized and, for this reason, being translocal. but not merely in the sense of being made visible by economic and cultural capital, say via film markets and the film festival circuit. We can appreciate their translocality when we pay attention, for example, to how similar the situations are of people who are displaced and how the political economic systems that leave them homeless are likewise ultimately interconnected. The relationship among inlands and islands is historically contingent. We can recognize that the stories that ground Sabah and Kedah and Mindanao and Patani or indigenous narratives of highlanders and seafarers are stories that have been or are being told for centuries before the current hegemony of states. Many communities are inland because they have resisted or eluded invaders. Many continue to cross the seas because they have always done so or because their own centers have neglected them. The films altogether remind us that the movements inland and connections among islands are dynamic processes. Moreover, these processes are dialectical and contradictory, seeking occasions of synthesis and resolutions, even as they are continuously disrupted by the influx of what is outside and vice versa. These places are not interchangeable, and their struggles are no abstractions. Thus, thinking of films as islands or being situated inland is a way of flagging and foregrounding incompleteness and counter purposes and material and symbolic violence, never denying or hiding or naturalizing fissures and divisions, and also a way of envisioning the horizontality of spaces, coalitions, and acts of solidarity. The program envisages the growth of filmmaking in the region without relying on the fictions of boundaries and center periphery relations. However, instead of leaving it latent, I want to emphasize in the wake of two recent events, one, Russia's attack of Ukraine, and second, the killing by Philippine state forces of unarmed activists, including Chad Book and Jureng Muho, and three others whose memories I want to honor in this short talk. Volunteer teachers to displaced indigenous children whose ancestral domains are being militarized and grabbed, that the questions of sovereignty, independence, and self determination remain urgent and central. In fact, they are the reasons that we conjure, through the humble task of programming and spectating, the fiction of utopia of peoples in solidarity and borderless lands, precisely to facilitate our imagination of others and their struggles against aggressors who, for prejudice, power, and wealth, destroy places and erase peoples with impunity. Which is to say, the program does not seek to erase the organizing ideal of the national, nor idealize the vague promise of the post-national. Instead of bounded thinking, it provides an opportunity for a topological and scaled appreciation of how films are made, where, by, and about whom, mapping cinematic imagination as dynamic processes of placemaking grounded in historical moments. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Patrick, for that wonderful introduction and talk. I guess now we can have a chat, and I just want to remind viewers out there again that you can submit your questions or comments at any time, and Patrick and I will try to address them. But I guess while we wait for, usually sometimes people are a bit slow. They might be still formulating, digesting what you just said, perhaps.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Perhaps I can just get the ball rolling. I have one or two questions myself.
Go ahead.
So I think what's something that's quite striking about the program is the time scale. We have Garin's film, the earliest film in the program that dates back to 1994, and then we have a film as recent as 2020 with Story of Southern Islet, and we are looking at about roughly about a 3-decade range, 3 decades where so much has happened. If you take Garin's film in context, that's about 3 years before the Asian financial crisis. Shortly after that, there was a .com boom and bust. And then if you take the mid 2000s, you have the post 9/11 milieu, and then social media in the 2010s. So you have various key events that Southeast Asia is quite receptive to in terms of these global changes. and and in terms of how that affects domestic issues and how we view ourselves as a region and nations. Is also deeply affected. We see in many ways there's a move towards a certain strengthening of nationality or national identity, a move towards perhaps more authoritarian ways of thinking and rule in various parts of Southeast Asia. I'm wondering if you could take us through how that informed the choices of where these films were, where and when these films were produced through the program.
Thanks for pointing that out, Vic. I think that's really important to point out the way, for example, Garin or Kidlat Tahimik in the Philippines are really pioneering because these films and these attempts at filming outside of the center were happening before the digital period because really the growth of this kind of cinema um, happens really exponentially when digital technology was introduced. But in the 90s, people shooting in 8 millimeter and actually at this time 16 millimeter, they're already trying to push the envelope. So this to me was important. I think it was a stroke of genius that AFA of course has letter to an angel because it was really it really created this very important beginning moment. Of course, there could be other films, but this I think is a perfect example of a filmmaker sort of from the center, but also sort of off center and going farther away from the center. And you're correct in pointing out that as we proceed through the decades, we see both this growth and also the way the it shifts in shape, right? So for instance, in the early 2000s, just when the digital technology was new, in Malaysia, for example, the little cinema was very important because Amir Muhammad and Wu Mingjin and Tan Chuy Moy, they were creating this space of non-Malay Malaysian cinema. But now, when we look at films from East Malaysia, we realize that this journey is incomplete, right? I mean, there was some kind of paving of way, but we are only seeing its full formation right now. Now, it's the same in the Philippines, it's the same in Indonesia, and many places. In other places with emergent cinemas, like in Laos, where there are only a few filmmakers, it's mostly in Vientiane, but now there's also in Luang Prabang. So even in these cinemas that are sort of just emerging or nascent, we see the same thing. And it's great to imagine it looking back because there are, I think, everywhere, Thailand, Singapore, the bigger cinemas, we sort of look to moments of independent cinema and we say, well, these were the founding moments. But in fact, we are in the midst of founding moments, right? That we are able to program these together suggests that in these specific places we are founding cinemas, just as when we used to be nostalgic about those independent days or indie days, right? So I think this is what we see from 1994 to 2020 is that there's this growth and also shifting of shape.
Hmm. And I think kind of leading from there, I would also like to maybe touch a bit on distribution and of course access to production and resources. Maybe you could comment a bit about how that plays out between the city centers and the kind of the outer regions or the subnational spaces that you speak about, because as you mentioned in your talk, whether it's the conception of the state or whether it's a self-realized idea of national identity, there does it does play out in terms of how filmmakers get access to resources, and at the same time how audiences get access to these films. I'm sure this plays out very differently in many different regions, but maybe you could comment a bit about that.
Yeah, okay. And I think this is a great point. This is a great moment to point out that on March 31st, we will have a more a better perspective since we will have people speaking from different places,
Sure.
right? So
Maybe this can be a bit of a teaser to that. Maybe.
that's right. That's right. What's amazing about this is, on one hand, in a way, they don't need any help. I mean, cinematic formations. I mean, communities cohering around film. I mean, they just come out, right? I mean, in sometimes in most unexpected places. For example, in the Philippines, in Nabunturan, in Mindanao, There's this place. They didn't have at that time a movie house, right? And yet they had a thriving filmmaking community. So in a way, you don't need that kind of help for it to emerge. It happens, for instance, in Sabah. I've been listening to the filmmakers there. It happens in schools a lot, of course. But you're correct that to a certain degree, these are organic grassroots formations, right? So in some cases, for instance, in northern Philippines, they make films within their place and then they distribute it also in their marketplaces, right? So they have no intention of being international or anything like that. But of course, the reality is we only get to see them when they reach a certain point, a certain moment of reaching a national consciousness and even an international one. Of course, these are not necessarily hierarchical, right? I mean, sometimes they fork. Sometimes we know them internationally first before we know them nationally. So, but what happens really there is these will be very few films really getting there, as opposed to the number of films actually produced in these places. And therefore, there's really more need to theorize the value of these films that are not seeking some kind of national or international recognition. Although, admittedly, most of these filmmakers, of course, want to be seen by many, right? So, and a program like this is a great opportunity, like to open this space. So, yeah, we can learn more about specific ones when we speak again on March 31st.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I think that's one of the great values of a program like this, because one of the things we try to do at AFA is not just present what is commonly thought of as Asian cinema or Southeast Asian cinema, but also to try to challenge those notions, within these defined boundaries that we work within, and I
Yeah.
think a program like this very much is such a great fit with what our programming ethos has been since the beginning. So okay, we have questions coming in as expected. It usually takes a while, and they're usually quite great questions. So just a comment from TJ Colanto. He says, "Woo, so wonderful, selamat po." Um, and we have a question from Justine Uy. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And they're asking, what is your favorite film in the program?
Wow, that's really tough. That's really tough. I mean, I mean, that kind of question you ask people who like films, right? I mean, what's your
Yeah,
favorite?
yeah.
Can I really
Maybe
answer that?
maybe if I
Yeah, I
may
mean,
sort
go,
of
go. Sure,
intervene
sure,
in that
sure.
to go, maybe what is a film that you would want to highlight to our audiences, that sort of yeah.
All right. I think I have. Let me give three titles I think are worth underlining, less for opening the program. Right. Um, the first one is Forgotten Memory. I think this is really a very important documentary to be screening and to be watched and to be talked about these days, right? So I don't know how many people are tuning in from outside the Philippines, and if you don't know what's happening in the Philippines now, we're moving toward our national elections, and the son of a former dictator is running for president. And Forgotten Memory is really very valuable for grounding a narrative that we hardly know in national consciousness about the massacre and abuses of hundreds and hundreds of Muslims in Mindanao during the time of Ferdinand Marcos. So I think this is important to highlight. The way the filmmaker Teng Mangansakan was able to uh, allow them to speak. Actually, a lot of the subjects in this documentary explicitly say that they're able to speak because this filmmaker is the one speaking to them, who's from there, right? I think this is the other value of placemaking and place-based films, is that if you're from there, you really understand where you're coming from, right? The other one that was really a great revelation to me, and I think Vic and Nat for this, is Russell Morton Saudade. And it's a short film that will be part both of the main program in Oldham Theatre and in the online program, which I hope you can catch. It was really a revelation because Singapore, I mean, you would think that you would have a compact cinema, right? But turns out, as this online program will reveal, that this is not necessarily so. And so that is a great example of how people step out of their own circles, right, and reveal something that maybe we didn't realize were there, used to be there. And the last one that is quite important in the Philippines is Eleutheria's Dream, or Ang Damgo ni Eleutheria. I've programmed this many times. Actually, this one and Pimpaka's the Island Funeral, I've programmed many times because they resonate. I realized that even if you show them in different places to different kinds of audiences, they resonate. So the laughter is the same, the recognition is the same. They see something and they recognize what is happening, even if they're not from there, right? I mean, even if they're not from the Philippines or they're not from Thailand, they recognize something that is resonant. So, well, I mentioned 4 titles, so live with it.
Um, Actually, it's nice that you mentioned Russell, because I believe he's actually tuning in live right now. So
Hi, Russell.
if Russell's out there, hello, and shout out to Saudade for anyone who hasn't seen it before. We screened it quite a few times ourselves, and for those who maybe have not seen it, do come by, watch it on the online program. We have another question also from Justine. Let me just put this up here. And they're asking, what is the role of international film festivals, Cannes, Berlin, etc., who favor films produced in the metropole, since the films are usually better resourced? Question mark. Thank you.
Well, I mean, these exhibition and distribution channels are still in place. They remain important for many reasons. I mean, they really expand our notion of world cinema. I mean, in many instances, there are places we've never seen films from that we'll find via these festivals. So they're in place, right? But in particular, and many of the films in this program have also been screened in big festivals or small festivals, whichever, right? So there's that's fine. I mean, they're in place and they're not going anywhere. Although I might qualify that they're not necessarily now looking for well-resourced films from the metropole. Sometimes they would screen films that will be sort of from the left field. Actually, a great example in the Philippines is Kidlat Tahimik's Perfume Nightmare from 1977. I mean, at this time, we didn't know who Kidlat was, and yet he won in Berlin, right? So this is a good example of when these big film festivals are able to create important spaces, right? But in particular, this program seeks to go beyond this paradigm where there is really an obvious hierarchy. There's gatekeeping, of course. There is that notion that those that get to these festivals are made, right? These filmmakers are made, which of course is far from the truth, right? I mean, they're good, but they're not necessarily the best validating forces, right? So the program is able to show us other ways of validation. So, for example, the Ballad of Cinema Lovers is a great example of where validation is really local. I mean, it's people there who are in it, who love the films and the filmmakers, right? So it's I think what's happening is it's expanding, and we really need more spaces outside of these huge festivals for more films to be produced and to be seen.
Actually, just to as a continuation of what Justine asked, I think Justine has asked a question that I wanted to ask a bit earlier as well, which is that, you know, as we see these festivals and also funding structures and development platforms that are linked to these festivals, as they get more and more complex and also more comprehensive over the years, I think I feel that we are faced with two kinds of issues. One is that we get more support for films from our region, and I feel even in the general wider film festival circuit, there is a greater emphasis and recognition of Southeast Asian cinema in recent years. But perhaps there's also a certain narrowing of choices, of tastes even. And I'm wondering if you could comment a bit on that.
Well, before directly commenting on that, I think when you mentioned growing support, even this is very uneven, I think, right? For instance, filmmakers from East Malaysia or even in the Philippines, right? So they would feel that the support is not enough, really. But that so much about films from the center or from the biggest cities are being given importance. In the Philippines, we have like so many film festivals. They're really festive, but at the same time, you sort of have a sense that these are not getting any sort of industrial support. So this is really like, I want to make a film and then let's make it, and then I don't know what will happen after that. So so even here it's uneven. I think it's also important to point it out that to point out exactly what kind of support we want, because when we look to models outside of Southeast Asia, and just look at Singapore, maybe in AFA, there are certain models that, well, we wish we could have in certain other places that we don't, right? Of course, there's the question of geography. For instance, Indonesia or the Philippines, it's really archipelagic. It's really, in the case of Indonesia, it's huge, right? But the efforts from grassroots is really amazing. It's hard to say now, commenting on what you said, it's hard to say that it's narrowing. I guess, the more concern is that we get to see the films, because for example, in the Philippines, I since I'm a programmer and also I study Filipino films, sometimes I try my best to watch as many films as I can in the Philippines, and that would be like 100, 200 films a year. And it's amazing, the variety. It's amazing where they're all coming from. But you always wonder, like, who saw these films, right? I mean, so maybe the sense that it's narrowing is a sense that's coming from the fact that we can't really find them. And it's also nice to also point out, for instance, we have streaming platforms these days, right? But still, the kind of choices we'll find there are like the same kind of choices that we would find elsewhere. So still, we need to create these spaces. And again, I can't emphasize this enough, that a program like this, or local programs where we actually give specifically spaces to these films we cannot see elsewhere, this is really the way to go, I think, for placemaking filmmakers.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick, for commenting on that. So we have a question from someone called Kit, and they ask, these are all non-fiction documentaries? Yes, some of them are, and some of them are also narrative fiction films. So there's that. We have a question from Yo Min Hui. Patrick, maybe you're familiar with her. She's also a scholar of cinema. So her question is, so thanks, Patrick and AFA, for this talk. There seems to be growing concern and interest about reconceptualizing Southeast Asian cinemas beyond national borders. I wonder if Patrick could elaborate a little on your current theorization of film islands. I refer to your contribution in the recent excellent JCMS special issue on regional cinema.
Thank you for kind words. Yeah, it's in development. I've been really thinking about this notion of film islands. Well, maybe just if just to start from the beginning about islands, right? So when we think of islands, we usually think of it as, well, in relation to, say, mainland or continent, right? And we imagine it as sort of out there, right? Or separate or insular. But in island studies, we begin with the notion that all landforms are islands. Some are big islands as big as continents, and some are very small islands, like a huge boulder, right? So when we begin to think about these images of islands as not insular but always networked, always both independent and networked with each other, then we can start thinking about local films, and which I in this talk I talked about them as translocal films. Um, so I think this is I'm developing this notion of film islands as a way for us to think about films in smaller formations, but also in interconnected and network formation. So no film island is ever on its own, right? But also, if you look at it, it's always like a thing in itself, right? So this is where I'm coming from when I speak of film islands, and I think so far it serviced a lot of my research. In fact, I could imagine a lot of these connections in this program and in other research that I'm doing by thinking of them as film islands rather than as films from national cinemas. It's really very difficult to think in terms of national cinemas because it's so large and it's so vast, and you don't really know where to start, and you really end up really hierarchical. I mean, you always begin with the big names, and you sort of think of the others as margins. But once you think of them as film islands, then suddenly they're all visible, right? So, yeah, that's how it's helped me so far.
Thank you, Patrick, and thanks Minhui for that great question. Russell has said hi. He says, "Hello, Patrick Campos and Asian Film Archive. So proud to be part of this stellar lineup." Thanks, Russell, for saying hi. We have Darlene who has texted us, who has sent us a question. I believe she's overseas. She's outside of Singapore at this point of time, but she has joined
She's
us.
in no I think. Yeah.
Yeah, she's in Phnom Penh. Yeah, on a research trip, I believe. So Darlene has a question and a comment. Let's put that up here. It doesn't seem to be showing up. Okay, there you go. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction to this amazing program, Patrick Campos. I'm very excited to see how the program unfolds and how these films reinforce, interrogate, and challenge what we mean by categories as regional, national, and local cinemas in Southeast Asia. Films off-center are often overlooked, but at the same time offer interesting vantage points about the multiplicity of experiences and narratives in the region. Quick question: how does the diversity of languages in the region? Okay, I think the question has sort of gone past the word limit. Let me try to find it here.
Well, I can deduce like how is the diversity of languages hampered?
Yeah, okay,
Is
let me
it?
just find the question here in full.
Sure.
Okay. How does the diversity of languages in the region hamper the circulation and reception of these off-center films? How do filmmakers try to overcome this? Do they even try, or do you think the drive still is to make films in local languages beyond national languages? That's the question. Those are the questions from Darlene. Yeah.
Thank you, Darlene. Thank you for the kind words. Yeah, I think my answer to this one is connected to the earlier answer. I think when we speak of local filmmaking or translocal filmmaking, the intentions are not always the same. Some of them really make films just for themselves, and in this case, being understood by people outside is not as important. Although, as mentioned, because of the nature of digital filmmaking and the possibility of always showing films, many of them do try to show films beyond their shores. It is true that one of the greatest challenges in doing research on Southeast Asian cinema is the language diversity. It's very, very, very difficult. I cannot overemphasize it because there's a lot of reliance on friends. Actually, I've been thinking about this too, like zones of friendship. In this kind of research on regional cinema, zones of friendship are very important. It's like a space where both of you can enter and talk about films, about each other's places, because otherwise you can't really understand a thing. In fact, even just going online, you'll find so many films there, but you will not be able to understand them. So it's very difficult. But for those that do get screened, of course, we have that system in place already. That people who do get invited, I mean, subtitles and digital screenings are not as difficult. But they're more or less films that do get out of their local spaces, right? So for most times, you need to rely on the filmmakers. You need to rely on like asking your friends, right, to help you figure it out. No? And I've done all kinds of things, like ranging from paying people to transcribe and translate to Google Translate, all these things, right? Because it's very difficult. So maybe that's another thing we can discuss on March 31st. I think when we create networks across nation states, very important that we have also the infrastructure for us to be able to speak with each other.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Darlene, for that question. And I think that sort of quite nicely brings us to the close. I just want to comment that, as you were talking, as we had the question streaming in, I kind of started to see parallels in what you're trying to do with these sort of island cinema, island films, and also about trying to problematize these notions of national boundaries, and at the same time about the very attempt at trying to grapple with or try to understand filmmaking from the region also requires these sort of networks and what you call zones of friendship. So it's a process that I see it in quite interesting parallels. The nature of filmmaking itself, and also the process of understanding how films are made in the region over time. They tend to have these parallel ideas or even notions of how we can try to understand them. Yeah.
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 Can I say one last thing about
Yes,
that?
please,
It's
please.
sort of nested really, because when I started getting interested in this idea of like islands, it began of course in the Philippines, because it's the same. I mean, when I want to watch films in the Visayas or in Mindanao, I still need their help. I mean, it's the same as like if I want to watch films from Malaysia or in Indonesia. It's the same process, and it's sort of nested because it actually can grow beyond the region. I mean, it's the same thing that we need when we want to watch films from the Middle East and wherever, right? So it really makes sense to think of them as parallels or as topological, right? I mean, in creating sort of stretching the spaces so that we are able to include as much as we can in similar processes, right? Very similar processes of dialogue, trying to understand, creating friendships, etc.
Yeah. Thanks, Patrick. I'm wondering if we have just a comment from Austin Tan saying thanks for this talk and program, Sir Patrick. Um, so I'm just wondering if you had any final comments or anything else you'd like to say before we call this to a close.
Well, just to say thank you again to AFA, and also to invite everyone. If you're not in Singapore, there's an online program that I think you really should see. And if you're in Singapore, please try to watch as many as you can. That's it.
Great. Awesome. And again, Patrick, we are really missing out on the opportunity to have you here in person, but this we have to do for now until things start to blow
Yeah.
over. But yeah, thanks again for everyone tuning in. The program runs at Oldham Theatre. There's 10 screening programs in-person screening programs. There's a total of 18 films in the entire program. Each will only be screening once at the cinema, so do come by, because if you miss one, that's it. There are no repeat screenings. So come by. There we are also running a special deal for this program. If you're an AFA member, Friends of AFA, part of the Friends of AFA program, you can bring a friend for free. So if you just turn up and just announce yourself as a AFA member, your friend gets to watch something for free. So if you know a friend who you've been wanting to bring and drag to AFA and introduce them to cool new films, this is the time to do it. It's like, low cost, right? Low barrier of entry. You just come in and they'll discover some really great Southeast Asian films. So thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for all the great questions. And thank you, Patrick, once again. And yeah, have a great evening. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.